So I'm going to ask you another question inspired by my consumption of Reddit commentary and all various
Okay.
social media screenshots and outrageous memes. So this question is inspired by that. So the idea that this is a slippery slope, like Dan Englehart is going down to sea salt right now, with his guns out, meaning his biceps, and he's going to close down
Sure.
sea salt. That's what's next.
We're rolling. We're rolling.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
We're back on the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. We are doing an episode on the Minnehaha Dog Park. So on Wednesday, the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board voted 8-1 to end the use of Minnehaha Dog Park for off-leash dogs, believing it to be in conflict with the sacred nature of the site for the Dakota community. This has understandably upset a lot of the dog owners who frequent this park. And today I'm joined by the Parks Commissioner who sponsored the resolution to decommission the off-leash use for this park, Jason Garcia. Thank you for being here, Jason.
Thanks, John.
I used to think I was the controversial friend in this relationship, but now you're the one dragging me down by association. I have to distance myself. Is that okay?
That's totally fair. I mean, especially, I know it's been a hard year for you having to deal with Josh Martin becoming increasingly boring, me starting controversies on the park board, Taylor becoming far more popular than you. I understand the pain you're dealing with right now.
It's chaos swirling around me in my social circle. I'm an icon in the animal community, and you're putting that at risk.
Do you think that the love that you feel from the cat community is in danger by the fact that the Minnehaha off-leash recreation area is going to be decommissioned by the end of the year?
There might be some crossover. Plenty of people who like both cats and dogs, right? Am I wrong about that? I don't own a cat or a dog, so I don't know.
I mean, yeah, there are a lot of people like myself that love all kinds of animals. I certainly didn't make this decision out of a distaste for animals or, the fact that my beloved pet Ella had to be put to sleep last summer. That's not my guiding light in this decision, as much as maybe some people believe it is.
I've been reading a lot of Reddit, so I am convinced maybe you do have a secret anti-dog agenda.
Is there a lot of evidence for that being floated around on Reddit?
People are posting stuff. You have some big haters out there. Although Dan Englehart is soaking up a lot of the energy because Dan was just so, how should I put it? He was like, bring it on. He was like, bring it on, dog people. I'm ready. And so you, a relatively soft-spoken person, maybe Dan Englehart is a heat shield for you.
Well, I think that all of us on the park board have, been hearing from people who are impassioned about this on both sides. And I definitely appreciate Dan for the intensity and emotion that he brings to a lot of discussions. And, having just had to put his senior dog to sleep, I know it's something that was on his heart heavily. And I'm happy that he does have, a younger dog, not quite a puppy anymore, but a young dog that he's able to take out and still have that companionship with.
Let's talk briefly about why this is a sacred place. I don't want this to be a super long episode. It's just one topic, but for listeners, why is this a sacred place? Yeah, let's start there.
As a lot of people maybe are familiar with, down near Fort Snelling and Pike Island, where the Mississippi and Minnesota come together, there is an area known as Bedote to Dakota people. in the Dakota creation story, Bedote is where Dakota people came from. In the story, they came out of the water there. Europeans tend to hyper localize that story to just the area by Pike Island there, like the actual confluence of the two rivers, but it actually represents a much larger area. Additionally, Coldwater Spring is in the area, and that is its own sacred site with deep historical and cultural ties to Dakota people. In the 1800s, there was a U.S. concentration camp where they rounded up Dakota people and kept them there, executed them, starved them, mistreated them. Really, it is one of the true scars in our history with the Dakota people. So all of these things are very localized in that area. And some people will point and say like, well, Bedote is really only at the junction of these two rivers, or Coldwater Spring is one specific area that is a specific point. But really, it's the entire area to Dakota people that is important.
So there's been a lot of talk about this archaeological report and the fact that it was initially not public and then portions of it were made public. There's talk about whether it's a burial site too, and people are online. I'm going based on online commentary here. I've consumed a ton of Reddit commentary. People are acting as though, well, you wouldn't bury bodies on this site because it is so close to the water, it would have been washed away. Like, does it matter whether or not there are bodies buried here? Is that actually what is in the report? Talk about that a little.
Basically, to give a little bit of history of this, a couple years ago, you may remember there was a big controversy about putting a fence up in that
I
area
do remember this.
at the
Yeah.
dog park, and people really had a lot of intense feelings about that. And the reason that was a plan at that time was because the National Park Service, who owns the land immediately adjacent to the off-leash recreation area, came to the park board and said, listen, people are using National Park Service land as the dog park. There's no demarcations of the boundaries. We're having unleashed dogs on national park land. There is a remnant savanna in the area. We're concerned about off-leash pets bringing in like seeds and pollen from invasive species and things like that. So you have to get a handle on this. So the park board started looking at the concept of putting up a fence in that area, and people were really unhappy with that when that was the concept, because it is, known to be an archaeological site. There are ruins that are visible on the surface from white settlers having a settlement there. Many people have seen like the fireplace that's down there and things like that. So that's on the surface from the 1800s. So, the fact that people are like, well, there can't be anything under the surface, that's maybe not quite true. The bigger concern was, saying, what can we find out about this area in that time before we start digging to put fencing in? So the board commissioned an archaeological literature review, which basically they had an outside agency review all of the literature they could find from primary archaeological sources and put that together. And then they came back and said, it is highly likely that there are archaeological remains both on the surface and subsurface of this area. They said if you really want to be sure of what those are, you can do a level 1 study, which is doing some digging and things like that. That was the report. There are redacted pieces of that in the publicly available report that was released a few weeks ago. We had been briefed in on that information when we got elected when we took office this winter, and we learned a little bit more about it. Then, we had a presentation from the National Park Service and the Minnesota Historical Society about the area. And yeah, that was when I really started looking at things and saying we need to take action to make sure that these historical harms that have happened to Dakota people aren't continually being visited upon them. We need to find a way to come to an agreement with the park board in how this space is used to make it more appropriate for how Dakota people view that land. And, we had heard from elders, knowledge keepers like Juanita Espinosa, Maggie Lorenz, who is Dakota and did a lot of years of work for the Minnesota Historical Society on their Dakota history programming and things like that. Samantha Odegaard has spoken about this. She is the tribal historian or historical officer for the Upper Sioux Dakota community. So we heard these things from not only people in the community who were coming to our meetings to talk about it, but from very knowledgeable people within the Dakota community as well. So really this is sort of the most recent step in almost a 2-year process of trying to figure out what to do with this area and how to move forward while honoring the Dakota people in ways that we haven't before because we haven't listened to them before.
So was this on your radar while you were running for office, or is it something you learned in the course of doing the job?
I'm really fortunate to know Dakota people and to have Dakota people in my life that have told me, their family stories about that area and about having relatives who were buried there, about having ancestors who died in that area and things like that. So I've been aware of the general history of the area for some time. I didn't know all of the details of these steps that the park board was taking. Obviously, I had heard about the controversy around fencing in the dog park and things like that, but I didn't know all of these details until I was briefed in and kind of got to hear more from our staff and the people who had been working on these ideas.
So the dog community showed up in force on the meeting on Wednesday. Lots of bad feelings. I saw a Carol Levin reporter was like, this was the most intense park meeting I have ever been to. People were angry. People were making maybe inappropriate signs, repurposing social justice cliches just for dogs, like no dog is illegal is the famous one. Can you explain why an off-leash dog park is in conflict with the sacred nature of the site more than other park uses? There was a lot made of the distinction between, well, why off-leash, but you're going to let me bring my leashed dog here. Or if it had turned it into a playground or something, maybe we decide that some other park is also sacred, but it's being used just as a park like Mueller Park. What would we do in that case? Like, what is it about the off-leash nature of a dog park that is just not compatible at all with being on this site?
I mean, I would guide people to the recording of our meeting from May 20th, where Juanita Espinosa discussed that in some length. The religious aspects of it aren't necessarily for me to speak on, but dogs have specific roles in Dakota society historically. Much like in white Christian society, where people love dogs, they're not usually included in religious ceremonies or things like that. You don't usually take your dog to church. Dogs generally aren't considered, and many animals, in fact, aren't considered a part of ceremony. Some ceremonies that Dakota people may want to engage in a sacred site like that are very long and have a lot of endurance involved, and having an off-leash animal approach you in that time can be difficult. It can be stressful. Most of the people who take their dogs to that area try their hardest to be respectful and to maintain control of their dogs even when they're off leash, but that simply doesn't happen all the time. And there's animal waste that is left there and things like that, which again people will argue and say that's very rare or it doesn't happen. But these are things that Dakota people have said are a hindrance in that area for them.
So I'm trying to think of analogies that could maybe help people understand or help me understand. Like there are places maybe like a civil war site where there are many bodies buried, places that like are supposed to be solemn, and that you
Right.
wouldn't want, I don't know if frivolous is the right word, but like you wouldn't want dogs just running around. It's supposed to be a place of solemnity, and like the use as
Right.
an off-leash dog park disturbs that. Is that like a good analogy?
I think so. And, there are certainly people who go there to grieve their families and grieve what they have lost, as a culture. And I do think that that is not an easy thing if there are dogs running around, if people are throwing tennis balls nearby, if, things that people are taking advantage of having an off-leash dog recreation area to do, but it's simply not the sort of thing that you would want in that sort of setting. There are also the other facts that, this is a cultural area, that's very important to Dakota people. There is, archaeological record to support that there is archaeological importance there as well. When it was established as a dog park, none of that was really looked at. There was no engagement done with Dakota people to say, hey, what do you think about this? Is this appropriate? It just sort of happened. That has caused a lot of difficult feelings for Dakota people that have not necessarily been addressed in a long time as well. In looking at the sum of all of this information that I was given on top of what I have known previously, this felt like a very reasonable compromise to say you are still allowed to have dogs in the area, but they have to be under control and on a leash rather than free to roam around at will and things like that. Many people have said you should be doing an archaeological study. And I really do hope that that is something that we can work with our staff on establishing. My hope is that when that study comes back, that people are willing to accept those results and say, if it turns out that this is an area that, is suitable for dogs, that's great. If it's not suitable for dogs, we may have to look at alternate things in the future. I really hope it doesn't come to that. That's sort of what I've wanted to avoid. We will, as the park board, will do our best to do a study and see what we can find more specifically in that area. We will probably still also have to work with the National Park Service on making sure that animals and things like that aren't ranging into their areas that they were concerned about a few years ago.
So, what is the name of the advisory body that advises the park board on this? The one, the Native Advisory Council, I think.
The Native American Parks Council.
Parks Council. So that's where you're hearing from people, from experts, from people who.
As individuals, we don't meet with the Parks Council. We do get information from them, but they do have representatives that will come, like Juanita Espinosa came and testified. Maggie Lorenz, of course, released her own statement and things like that. So we're in communication with the Native American Parks Council, but they want to avoid being politicized. So we don't generally sit in on their meetings to hear what they're discussing or to tell them what we're thinking or things like that. We generally get summary information and key points and things like that through a liaison.
So I'm sure you've seen some of the news coverage offering like differing views among Native people. Like, there'll be quotes like, "We dogs aren't particularly problematic here. We value dogs too." I wonder how you weigh differing opinions, not just among like dog owners, but the Native community as well, and like how you decide which way to go and what to put more weight on than not.
One thing that I do is I read every email that I get. I make sure that I'm absorbing that information and thinking about how that applies to things that we're considering. And I do that for every issue, not just this one. We are, always receiving as much information as possible. Like I said, hearing things from noted elders, hearing things from knowledge keepers, from tribal historians, those things are really weighed heavily for me, at least. And certainly I do hear voices that dissent. One of the things that is important to realize is like we've heard from people who are parts of Ojibwe tribes but this is specifically Dakota land. I've had people email me to tell me that their wife, who is part Cherokee, doesn't think this is problematic. And while obviously no group of people is a monolith, you're never gonna have 100% agreement across everyone of any group. I do think it's important to consider people who are experts in their fields and take them at their word when they say this is something that is important. And, we did hear from at least one Dakota person who didn't agree with that. And I did sit with that for a while when I was considering her words and what she was saying and why she felt that this decision didn't need to be made. Again, it's very hard for me to say this person who reached out, their word can counteract elders and knowledge keepers and historians in this area, particularly given the other issues of the archaeological importance, cultural importance, and even just the practical things of we're going to have to figure out a way to keep dogs from running into national park land.
And I imagine there is a lot of sensitivity in the Native and Dakota community about we don't want to be seen as the bad guys. Right? We don't want people coming after us. We have done something awful to people and made their lives worse, and it's our fault. I sense that a little bit from some people who are giving quotes in the newspaper.
Yeah, I mean, nobody wants to be the person who says, we understand that you love this thing, but we're going to take it away for some, as a respect of other people. It's certainly not something that was, high on my list of things that I wanted to try to do as a park commissioner. But when you're presented with these things, it is important to consider the full range of causes and effects as to where we've gotten and how we're here, and to say what is the appropriate relief for Dakota people who have, again, been coming to the park board for a long time and asking for this particular measure of relief. So I think that's something that all of us can sit with and think about, that it's not always easy for people who have been the most dispossessed, who have historically the highest rates of poverty, incarceration in our area, to organize and rally and show up at the park board. So it is important when they take the time to speak and to consider their words and to weigh them as we look at what we should do moving forward.
So I'm going to ask you another question inspired by my consumption of Reddit commentary and all various okay. Social media screenshots and outrageous memes. So this question is inspired by that. So the idea that this is a slippery slope, Dan Englehart is going down to sea salt right now with his guns out, meaning his biceps, and he's going to close down sea salt. That's what's next. To put that in a more serious way, could this happen again? Could you find some information about some other place and shut it down? Is this an agenda to take all of our parks away and do land back, and then we're all us white people are left without any parks to go to because of your agenda, Commissioner Garcia?
I am glad that you brought up the concept of a slippery slope, because going back to when I was a young person in college, that was always my favorite of the logical fallacies. It's always been my favorite to point out in heated argumentation and rhetoric, to say well, if this one thing could happen, surely all of these other things can happen. That can be really fun and it can make for great comedy. It doesn't always make for the best argument in a serious discussion, but I can certainly understand that people are concerned about things like this. And I will say, I feel like those of us on the park board are concerned with making sure that we do the right things for not just Indigenous people, but certainly our Indigenous neighbors, and also Black people, investing in our historically Black areas in the city, Latinos, other immigrant communities that have come into the city. We're going to continue looking at how we can best include them and make the park system work for them, and do what is right in terms of honoring the land that we're charged with stewarding.
So why did it have to happen now? So that was part of the debate on Wednesday was I think Abeni wanted to establish like a longer process so that people didn't feel blindsided by it. Maybe it's a delay tactic, maybe it's sincere. Why did the decision have to be made as quickly as it was and not, establish a process for a decision later?
I definitely share those concerns. I wish that these would have been things that were addressed last year or the year before, and that we had been talking about whether this area was appropriate for a dog park going back to 2023, 2024, 2025, and that there had been a longer time for that. Again, when you weigh the desire for a longer process for process's sake against the harm that has been done and continues to be done to Dakota people, it felt prudent at this point to move quickly with urgency to help resolve some of these things and not lead people on in a process of saying, yes, tell us your opinions. And then 6 months later, just be like, well, we didn't change our mind. So now you're getting the same result. And I hope you're happy that you spent all of your time talking to us about it.
My favorite thing to do is accuse people of rigging the process. You decided ahead of time that the process was rigged. That's probably what you would have heard. You'd already made up your mind, Commissioner Garcia. Kind of remarkable that something with so much controversy around it ended up being an 8-1 vote. I wonder if that took a lot of conversation with your fellow commissioners, or if it was just so evident by what you had heard individually from people that it was kind of easy for it to be an 8-1 vote.
Certainly because of open meeting laws and things like that, we weren't all meeting up and discussing these things for weeks and months out of the public eye. That didn't happen. After we received our briefings and received our reporting and things like that, I made the decision that I was going to author this resolution. I considered a lot of different outcomes. I did research on what other monuments and sacred places have as policies for their land use. And I worked hard with staff to create a very direct but reasonable resolution. I think what you're seeing when you look at this 8-1 vote, and even the person who voted against it, she said that she didn't necessarily have a problem with the outcome. It was the process. I think what you're seeing is a broad understanding of this not being a place that we should have an off-leash dog recreation area, and that we should potentially be doing something different. And, having so many of my fellow commissioners vote in this way was very comforting, to know that we share these values, that it's not a contentious issue, that all of us want to do these things to be better about supporting our history, and supporting our Indigenous neighbors and relatives. So I think that is important too, to look at and say this was something that came from a consensus across commissioners, across people representing very different geographic areas, but that all of us share these values of caring deeply about people and wanting to make sure we're doing the right thing.
So is Lisa Goodman going to help you establish a new dog park? Are we allowed to talk about that? Is Lisa Goodman helping you?
I don't think I would phrase it that way. Lisa Goodman and I have had a nice conversation about the fact that she was appreciative of the work that I've done on the board thus far and how I've comported myself. And she did offer her services as somebody who has done work in this arena before. Certainly, she's somebody that I will reach out to as we move further into this process, because I think she has a lot of great experience, and she also understands the process of how to get things done when you're an elected official. And I think it's important to, listen to people when they have different ideas and things like that.
So are you pledging a new dog park in this part of town by the end of your first term?
I would love to have multiple new dog parks in the city long before the end of my first term. Yes.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that is, I think, the action that all of us on the board want to see. And I think you'll see a a lot of movement toward that going forward.
Okay, Commissioner Jason Garcia. I'm going to be using Taylor Darlene's photo of the "No Dog is Illegal" sign from that meeting for the thumbnail, just for clicks. I will be using it for clicks because I want people to listen to this episode.
And water is life. Dogs deserve it too, I think was the other one.
Do you think they knew what they were doing, repurposing the social justice cliches? Because it's a lot of yada, 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 but for dogs on the end of these things.
I mean, it seems like they're an organized group of people. They're very passionate and motivated. So I would assume that they put a lot of thought into this, and we can definitely disagree on the outcome, but pretty much everybody who emailed me, even, especially the people who were saying don't close the dog park, all of them said we're deeply concerned about the Dakota's sacred areas and things like that. So, I hope that they did put a lot of thought into that and were expressing themselves in the way that they wanted to be heard. And they came and we listened to them during our open comment period. And I think, that's one of the great things about our representative democracy in the city is that a lot of people show up to get involved, and you can really get a view of a lot of different people and viewpoints from around the area.
It's been a good conversation, Commissioner Jason Garcia. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, John.
Okay, this has been the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. Thank you for listening.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.